They say you are your thoughts. But let me ask you, if that were true, wouldn't we all be overdue for psychiatric evaluation? I mean, really, if I'm the one who just thought, did I leave the stove on in 1987? Then I need more than meditation. I need supervision. Welcome, dear soul, to another slow breath of reflection here on Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly. We're not here to argue philosophy. We're here to ask better questions, like this one. If you're not your thoughts, who's thinking them? The answer isn't in a book. It's in the space between thoughts, the one we visit every day without noticing. And that's why you'll want to stay for part 5, becoming the sky, not the storm. It's not just poetic, it's practical. That part alone might save you from drowning in the next wave of anxious chatter. Seriously, if this made you smile or sigh, please like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 kindred subscribers and give us the joy and karma to keep making heart-guided videos like this. Now take a breath. You're not lost. You're just watching clouds drift by. And maybe, just maybe, you've always been the sky. Part 1. The Thought Machine. How thoughts happen without you. Have you ever tried to sit quietly and clear your mind, only to discover that your brain had other plans? Maybe you sat down on the porch thinking, peace at last. But instead of calm, you got a parade. What's for dinner? Did I forget to send that birthday card? I hope the kids are doing okay. Why did Mary say that to me in 1992? The mind, left to its own devices, doesn't rest. It wanders, it plans, it rewinds, it invents things that may never happen and replays things that already did, 10 different ways. It's not your fault. It's not a glitch. It's actually how the untrained mind works. In Buddhism, this tendency is explained through a profound teaching called pratityasamutpada, or dependent origination. It simply means that nothing arises independently. Not your thoughts, not your emotions, not even your personality. Everything arises due to causes and conditions. Take a thought like, I wonder if I've done enough with my life. Where did that come from? It might have been triggered by a song you heard, or a photograph, or someone else's story about retirement or illness. Maybe it was something as subtle as a breeze carrying the smell of hospital soap that reminded you of a loved one. Suddenly, a memory stirs, a question forms, an emotion rises, all from that one breeze. This is how it works. Thoughts are not self-generated by some little thinker behind the curtain. They emerge out of a vast, interconnected web of past experiences, bodily sensations, sights, smells, sounds, and memories. One condition sparks another, and another, and another. That's why the Buddha used nature metaphors so often. He compared the mind to a forest, a river, a field. Nothing stands alone. Everything grows from seeds, some planted yesterday, some decades ago. Let's do something together, just for 10 seconds. Close your eyes, unless you're driving, and try to predict your very next thought. Go ahead. I'll wait. What happened? If you're like most people, 2 things probably occurred. Either your mind went strangely quiet, or a completely unexpected thought popped in, as if to prove a point. Why is my nose itchy? Did I leave the stove on? Do turtles have knees? The moment you try to observe the thought before it happens, the entire system shifts. Why? Because you changed the conditions. That's the power of mindful awareness. It interrupts the automatic machine. And more importantly, it reveals something essential. You are not in charge of what appears, but you can change how you relate to it. Buddhists call this endless chatter the monkey mind. Always jumping from branch to branch, grabbing one thought, then another, never staying still for long. It's not evil. It's not broken. It's just untrained. Especially in our later years, the monkey mind can get even busier. We've lived through so much. We've collected joys, losses, triumphs, and regrets, and every one of them has left a little imprint in the mind. That's a lot of branches for a monkey to swing from. But here's the hopeful part. You don't have to stop the monkey. You just have to watch it gently. No judgment, no need to shout or scold. Just notice. with kindness, and slowly a space opens up. The monkey pauses, the wind calms, and something clearer than thought begins to emerge, something that feels a lot like peace. Part 2. The illusion of the thinker and the truth about no self. Most of us live our entire lives with this quiet, unquestioned assumption: there's a little me inside my head, doing all the thinking. It feels that way, doesn't it? There's a thinker, a narrator, a manager, a tiny executive, perhaps wearing glasses, sitting in a control room, flipping switches, and commenting on everything from breakfast to politics to whether the neighbor's new haircut was a mistake. But if that little me is really in charge, why can't it control what thoughts arise? Why do certain memories ambush us at 2 a.m.? Why does worry creep in while brushing your teeth? In Buddhism, this is where the teaching of anatta, non-self, gently shatters the illusion. The Buddha didn't say you don't exist, that would be silly. He said that what we call self is not permanent, independent, or in control. It's not one thing. It's a bundle of processes, constantly changing, always arising and dissolving. To help make sense of this, the Buddha offered a beautiful breakdown called the 5 aggregates, Panchakanda. 1. Form, rupa, your body, the physical stuff. 2. Feeling, vedana, sensations, pleasant or unpleasant. 3. Perception, labeling, naming things. 4. Mental formation, sankhara, habits, thoughts, impulses. 5. Consciousness, jnana, simple awareness. That's it, that's all we are. A swirl of these 5. No hidden puppet master pulling the strings, no permanent me behind the curtain. And here's where it gets profound, especially for those of us growing older. Think about how identity shifts over time. In your 20s, you might have said, I'm a teacher. In your 40s, I'm a parent. In your 60s, I'm retired. And by 70 or 80, maybe those old labels start to peel off. But even as roles fall away, that voice in your head keeps saying, I'm still me. Yet, who is that me exactly? Is it the same me you felt at age 12? This is not meant to unsettle you. It's meant to free you. Let me share a true story about a friend named Harold. He was in his late 80s, legally blind and losing his short-term memory. But he had a gentle presence about him, like a stone smoothed by decades of waves. One day, I asked him how he felt about forgetting things. He laughed and said, "Sometimes I forget where I put my shoes, but I've never forgotten where I am." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, even when I can't remember the name of the nurse who just helped me, I still feel present. I may not remember what I thought 5 minutes ago, but I'm here now, watching. That's enough." What Harold discovered, without knowing Buddhist terms, was the truth of non-identification. The thoughts may come and go, the memory may fade, but the awareness watching it all remains, not as a fixed self, but as a simple presence, a knowing. The Buddha once said, "This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself." He wasn't being dramatic. He was pointing out a gentle truth. When we stop clinging to each thought, each role, each emotion, we don't disappear, we wake up. And in that waking up, even aging becomes a kind of wisdom. You don't need to chase who you were, you just need to remember who's watching. Part 3. The empty seat. Searching for the one in charge. Let's do something a little strange together. Just pause and try to find the one who's doing the thinking. Don't think about the question. Don't theorize. Just look, right now, inside your own experience. See if you can spot the thinker, the one pulling the levers. The driver behind the wheel. Most people come back with a puzzled look. What they often discover isn't a self, but something more like a space. A series of passing moments, thoughts floating in and floating out. But no solid controller, no little pilot behind the eyes. It's a bit like opening the door to a house you thought was crowded, only to find it empty. This isn't a failure of the search, it's the point of the search. The Buddha encouraged this kind of inner investigation. He never asked us to believe blindly. He asked us to look carefully, gently, kindly. And when we look, we start to see that what we took to be me is more like a moving process. A candle flame, not a statue. Let's take a short detour into story time, because stories, like candles, have a way of illuminating things. There was once a monk named Kamaka who took this inquiry seriously. He didn't just accept the idea of no self, he wanted to test it. So he looked into each of the 5 aggregates: his body, his feelings, his perceptions, his thoughts, his consciousness. One by one he asked, "Is this truly me?" And each time the answer came back, "It changes, it fades, it arises on its own, it's not mine." Even the thought, "I am thinking," turned out to be just that, a thought, not the thinker, just another wave on the ocean. Now, for those of us aging gracefully, or ungracefully, it depends on the day, this kind of examination takes on new meaning. We start to realize that the body isn't as familiar as it once was. The knees argue, the memory forgets to RSVP. The emotions, grief, longing, even bursts of joy, feel like they have minds of their own. And so the question becomes even more important. If I'm not the body, and not these changing thoughts, then what am I? Let me tell you about Eleanor. Eleanor was 92 when she started asking this question. Not from a meditation cushion, but from her recliner, staring out at the plum tree in her backyard. One day, she told her granddaughter, "I used to think I was the thinker. Now I just feel like the sky, and thoughts are birds flying through." She smiled and added, "Some of them poop on me, but I don't take it personally anymore." That's the gift of a long life and an open heart. Eleanor didn't need a monastery. She had a lifetime of watching thoughts come and go, and at some point she stopped trying to own them. The Buddha offered teachings not to remove us from life, but to help us live with less suffering. And what causes suffering, more than anything, is our clinging to the idea of a fixed me in control of it all. But when you can't find the thinker, you don't vanish. You relax. You open. And for the first time, maybe in decades, you exhale into peace. You see, you were never the thoughts. You were the empty seat all along. Part 4. Awareness is not a thought. It's something deeper. There's a quiet revolution that happens in spiritual practice. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It happens in a whisper. A simple moment when a person realizes, wait a minute, I can see the thought, which means I'm not the thought. That's where everything begins to change. You see, most people live as if they are in their thoughts, as if each one is a pair of pants they have to wear. But thoughts aren't pants. You don't have to put them on. You can just let them pass like clouds across an open sky. And more importantly, you are not the cloud. You are the sky. This is what the Buddha pointed to with the word sati, mindfulness. Not just paying attention, but remembering to observe with kindness, not to control, not to fix, just to witness, gently and clearly. Let's make it real. I once knew a man named Arthur, a retired school principal in his 70s, who found himself swimming in grief after his wife passed away. The thoughts were endless. I should have done more. Why didn't I see the signs? She was the best part of me. One day, his grandson brought over a book on mindfulness. Arthur grumbled, "I don't want to meditate. I want my wife back." But he tried something simple. He sat in his recliner, and every time a thought came, he just labeled it: thinking, grieving, remembering, missing. Not to push it away, just to recognize it and let it float by. He told me, "I didn't feel better right away, but I felt spacious, like I had room to breathe inside the sadness." That's the shift. Not less pain, but less entanglement. Science is catching up to what the Buddha knew under the Bodhi tree. Studies from researchers like Dr. John Kabat-Zinn show that mindfulness actually changes the structure of the brain. It strengthens areas related to focus and compassion. It shrinks parts tied to stress and fear. So yes, watching your thoughts with kindness can literally rewire your brain. But it's not about becoming some kind of emotionless monk. It's about seeing clearly, living gently. It's about having a thought like, "I'm not good enough," and saying, "Oh, hello, I see you, you can sit there, but I don't have to believe you." Try this with me now. For just 10 seconds, Sit and observe the next thought that arises. Don't judge it. Don't push it away. Just greet it like a passing breeze. Maybe it was random, maybe it was emotional, maybe it made no sense. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. You noticed it. And in that noticing, you stepped out of the stream. You became the witness, not the story, but the space in which the story unfolds. The Buddha once said, "Just as the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does the Dharma have one taste, the taste of freedom." Freedom doesn't mean empty. It means unbound. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which they rise and fall. And that awareness, it's as steady as the earth, as vast as the sky, and as quiet as love itself. Part 5, Inner Spaciousness, Becoming the Sky, Not the Storm. Have you ever looked up at the sky just before a storm? The clouds gather, the wind stirs, the trees begin to sway, but no matter how wild it gets, the sky itself never flinches. That, my friend, is your true mind. Not the whirlwind of thoughts, memories, or opinions, but the spacious awareness that holds them all. This is not poetry, it's reality, once you start to live from that space. The Buddha often spoke about equanimity. In Pali, upekkha, a kind of deep, steady balance. It doesn't mean being cold or numb. It means being present with whatever arises without being tossed around by it. Especially as we age, this teaching becomes more than spiritual. It becomes essential. Because aging invites everything that shakes the ground beneath us. Bodies change. People leave. Names slip. Loss visits. And the mind, sensing all this change, tries to grip tighter. It clings to routine. It clings to the past. It clings to control. But here's the paradox. The tighter we grip, the more suffering we create. Aging isn't the storm. Clinging is the storm. I once sat with a woman named Ruth, a retired nurse who had buried 2 husbands and lived alone in a small home filled with books and silence. She had weathered more storms than most. I asked her how she stayed so steady. She smiled, tilted her head, and said, "Well, sweetheart, I stopped trying to fix the sky." She had learned, through decades of joy and heartbreak, that peace doesn't come from controlling thoughts. It comes from letting them come and go without clinging to any of them. Modern science agrees. Recent neuroscience studies show that people who train in mindfulness and equanimity actually reduce the reactivity of the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and stress. Elderly participants in these studies showed increased emotional regulation, lower anxiety, and a greater sense of meaning in life. So yes, equanimity is both ancient and cutting edge. And here's the most surprising part. It's not something you achieve. It's something you already have. Let's try a little practice. Think of a recent moment that upset you. Something small. Maybe the doctor's office called late, or your friend forgot your birthday. Don't relive it, just bring it to mind. Now imagine that moment as a rainstorm. Instead of stepping into it, just watch it from a window. The rain is real, but you are inside, safe, observing, calm. This shift from being in the storm to becoming the sky that watches the storm, that's equanimity. The Buddha called this the middle path. Not suppressing thoughts, not drowning in them, just letting them pass like birds across the horizon. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You stop being surprised by the rain. You bring an umbrella of presence. You become the calm center in a world that never stops spinning. And here's a secret many young people don't know. Older adults, when they stop fighting change, often experience more peace than they ever did when they were young and in control. Why? Because by then, we've learned the truth. The storm doesn't last. And the sky was never broken. Part 6. What happens when you stop chasing thoughts? So what happens when you stop chasing thoughts? Here's the honest answer. At first, it's terrifying. Then, it's peaceful. And eventually, it's liberating. You stop needing to catch every thought like a dog chasing cars. You stop believing every inner critic who pops up like a radio DJ stuck in the 1950s. You begin to notice that thoughts are more like background music. You don't have to dance to every song. In the Alagaddupama Sutta, the Buddha shared a story that perfectly captures this. He spoke of a man using a raft to cross a river. The raft is essential. Without it, he would drown. But once he reaches the other shore, does he strap the raft to his back and keep carrying it? Of course not. That's what thoughts are like. They're useful. They help us navigate, solve problems, express love, grieve our losses, plan our meals. But if we keep clinging to them long after they've served their purpose, they become a burden. Buddhism doesn't tell you to stop thinking. It tells you to think wisely. That's where Yoniso Manasikara comes in, wise attention. It means paying attention in a way that leads to understanding and liberation, not confusion and suffering. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about responding instead of reacting. Let me tell you about someone who lived this truth. His name was Angulimala. He was by all accounts a terrifying man, a feared killer. A lost soul drowning in thoughts of vengeance, anger, and madness. His name meant Garland of Fingers, not exactly a flattering nickname. But one day, he encountered the Buddha, and the Buddha didn't run or resist. He simply looked at Angulimala and said, "I stopped long ago. When will you?" That moment cracked something open in him. Angulimala realized that his whole life had been a reaction. Every violent act, every burst of rage, it was just thought after thought, unexamined and obeyed. And in that realization, he stopped. He didn't just change his actions. He changed his relationship to his mind. He became a monk. He learned to observe his thoughts without obeying them. He discovered, perhaps for the first time, freedom. Now, you might not be wearing a garland of fingers, but maybe you're wearing a garland of worries, of regrets, of stories about how things should have been. What would it be like to set that down? What would it be like to greet each thought like a stranger at the door, polite but not obligated to invite it in? Here's a simple way to practice this. 1. Notice a thought, any thought, even "I don't like this practice." 2. Name it. Thinking, judging, planning, replaying, worrying. 3. Smile at it. You caught it. That's enough. You don't need to fix it. 4. Let it float. Imagine it's written on a leaf drifting down a river. You don't need to chase it, just watch it pass. Over time, you'll begin to live more like the Buddha himself, calm, grounded, alert, and free. Because it's not about stopping thoughts. It's about not being their servant anymore. And that, dear friend, is the difference between suffering and spaciousness. Part 7. Thought is just another sense, like smell or sight. Here's something most people don't realize until it's pointed out gently, like a finger touching the surface of a still pond. Thinking is just another sense. That's right. Just like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching, thinking is a way your system takes in and processes experience. It's not who you are, it's how you sense things. In Buddhist teachings, this is crystal clear. The mind, or mano, is considered the sixth sense. It sits right alongside the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, not above them. Not more sacred, not more personal. And this changes everything. Let's make it real. Imagine you're on your porch, sipping tea. You hear a bird chirp. That's hearing. You feel the breeze on your face. That's touch. You smell your neighbor's over-enthusiastic barbecue. That's smell. And then a thought arrives. I should call my daughter. That's thinking. It's just another impression, another visitor. You didn't choose it. You didn't manufacture it. It just arose. But here's where things get tricky. You don't usually say, "I am breeze." You don't say, "I am barbecue smell," but you do say, "I am anxious," or "I am confused." Just because a thought came through. Why? Because we've been taught to identify with thought in a way we don't with other senses. We don't treat sound or sight as ours, but when a thought appears, we immediately take it personally. We think, that must be me. But if a thought is just a sense impression, why cling to it? Why believe it without question? Let me introduce you to Walter. Walter was 81, a retired mailman with sharp eyes and even sharper wit. He once told me, every time I forget something, my brain gives me a little panic thought. This is it, you're slipping. He used to believe those thoughts. He'd spiral into anxiety. But one day, he paused and asked, if I can notice that thought, maybe I'm not the thought. And just like that, he stopped taking it so personally. I treat thoughts like my old dog now, he said. Sometimes she barks. Doesn't mean there's a burglar. Brilliant. That's the heart of the practice. Learning to relate to thoughts as events, not truths. Modern psychology confirms this view. In cognitive behavioral therapy, a core teaching is cognitive diffusion, the practice of separating yourself from your thoughts. It helps with depression, anxiety, even chronic pain. And it echoes exactly what the Buddha taught. See thoughts not as self, but as conditioned phenomena. You can try this today, right now even. Watch your thoughts like scenery from a train window. You don't chase the trees, you don't scold the cows, you just notice. One thought might say, I'm lonely. Another might whisper, I'm too old to change. Another might shout, they should have called me. Don't argue, don't cling, don't drown, don't drown. Just notice, there's that old familiar song again. And return to the breath, return to now. Because here's the truth. You are not your sense of smell, you are not your sense of sight, and you are not your thoughts. You are that which senses them all. The open, quiet space where it all arises, dances, and fades away. That's not philosophy, that's freedom. Part 8. The Mind Aging Gracefully. Elder Wisdom Meets Buddhist Practice. There's a quiet secret no one tells you about growing old. The mind ripens. Yes, the body stiffens, the knees get chatty, and the memory plays hide and seek. But something else happens, too. If we're paying attention, if we're even a little bit awake, the mind begins to open in ways it never could when we were busy chasing success, relationships, or perfect cholesterol levels. In Buddhist tradition, aging isn't viewed as a decline. It's seen as a sacred opportunity, a natural softening of the ego, a loosening of the grip. What youth tries to achieve through force, age invites through surrender. And science agrees. Studies in geriatric psychology show that older adults often have greater capacity for reflection, meaning-making, and emotional regulation. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for wisdom and long-term thinking, often becomes more balanced as impulsivity fades. In other words, the brain starts to do naturally what meditation trains us to do on purpose. Pause, reflect, release. I once met a woman named Lois, a retired piano teacher with a soft voice and sharper insight than most monks. She told me that when she turned 85, she began meditating each morning. Not with a timer or mantra, but by staring at her living room curtains and just noticing. I sit, she said, and I watch my mind try to tidy the past. It brings up old guilt, old conversations like dust on sheet music. But I've learned not to blow it all away. I just let it settle. She smiled and added, after a while, the dust sparkles in the light. It's not a mess, it's my life. That, my friend, is a Dharma teaching. You see, the mind doesn't need to be perfect to be free. It just needs to stop clinging, and aging, with all its creaks, losses, and blank spaces, creates the perfect conditions for this soft detachment. In many Buddhist stories, it's the older characters, the ones who've been through heartache, loss, and impermanence, who awaken first. Why? Because they've lived long enough to see that control is an illusion. They've lost enough to understand the value of presence. They've surrendered enough to know that peace doesn't come from what you hold, but from what you're willing to lay down. And the laying down gets easier with age. One of the Buddha's great lay disciples, Visakha, was a grandmother many times over. When she lost her own granddaughter, she came to the Buddha in tears. He didn't tell her not to feel. He didn't offer cheap comfort. He simply asked, "Would you rather not have loved her?" She shook her head, "Of course not." "Then let your tears be the measure of your love," he said. "And now, let that love flow into the world." This is how the elderly mind transforms. Not by thinking less, but by loving more gently. not by escaping thought, but by becoming tender toward it. So if you find yourself sitting alone in the kitchen, sipping tea, staring at nothing in particular, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't panic about the thoughts that float in. You might just be sitting in the perfect place for awakening. Because sometimes, the moment your mind stops trying to figure it all out is the moment your heart finally knows. So what did we learn today? You're not your thoughts. You're not your memory of 1973. You're not even that running commentary in your head that sounds suspiciously like your old high school gym teacher. You are the one watching all of it pass by, like wind through bamboo. And that awareness, it doesn't age. It doesn't panic. It doesn't judge. It just is. We've explored monkey minds, silent skies, and the strange realization that sometimes the most liberating answer is no answer at all. And if any of this resonated, even just one breath of it, go ahead and give this video a like. It lets YouTube know that this kind of elder-centered, soul-honoring content matters. And it helps us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, so we can keep making more of this soft medicine for the aging heart. Got a thought, a memory, or a cloud you want to share? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where your age is not a problem, it's your path to awakening. Until next time, keep watching the sky, not the storm.